You can go ahead.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to day 4 of this Indology Festival 2022. We are excited to have you once again as part of this evening's lectures. We've been together in this Indology Festival for the last three and a half days. In my mind, I compare this Indology Festival like a cricket test match. I'm a big lover of test matches. In a test match, you have these sessions. You have a morning, pre-lunch, pre-tea, post-tea sessions. Likewise, at least yesterday and today, we've been having morning and evening sessions. If you look at the middle part of the test match, the day 3 and day 4, you will find that there is a huge swing that happens in terms of fortunes of the teams that are playing. Each team tries to take control of the game, and for those of you who enjoy watching test matches, the fortune of the test match keeps swinging from this team to that team. First session you have this team taking control. Next session the fortunes swing in the other favor, and so on. Likewise, particularly the last 3 days, we've been having big swings. What do I mean by that? For example, we've been swinging from one part of India to the other. For example, we had a couple of days back, we had Mr. Sitaraman come and talk to us about the Panchayat Temples, Vettuvan Kovil, that are here in Tamil Nadu. And then after that, we had a lecture on Gurjara Pratiharas by Dr. Manjari. Yesterday, from the western part of India, there was a swing to the eastern part of India where Dr. Sudeepa spoke about the Pala Sena dynasty and the temples that they built in Bihar and Bengal. Then last night, Dr. Sushmita Sen gave a lecture on the Sun Temple and the Solanki dynasty. So from east, we swung back to the west. This morning, Mr. Manoj spoke to us about the the southern part of Karnataka, Belur, Halabid, Somanathpura, and all the Hoysala art. And then we had, so from center, we swung to the south, and then we had Dr. Mishra talk to us in a totally different flavor about the Khajuraho excavation. So what Tamil Heritage Trust is doing with this Indology Festival, obviously you're all watching this live, is also creating, excellent content that is out there in the YouTube, for all of you to watch. So if you have missed any of the sessions over the last three and a half days, we would encourage you to go back and watch this. There is a big content that has been put out there in YouTube. We would highly encourage you to watch that. So with that, I'm extremely delighted to welcome Dr. Sanjay Acharya, our first speaker for the evening, who is going to talk about the Eastern Gangas and Kalinga architecture style. Dr. Sanjay Acharya was the professor and the head of Department of Ancient Indian History of Utkal University till 2022. He completed his MA in Ancient Indian History, followed by MPhil, and then PhD for the Mukteshwara Temple, a study of its architecture and sculptures. After a brief stint in NCERT, he returned to the Utkal University in 1994 and retired as head of department in 2022. He has published papers on varied subjects like the documentation of temple art and architecture and its relevance, Buddhism, its role as a cultural connect, social bridge, and source of international peace, conservation and preservation of the Sun Temple Konark, Odisha, the sculptural program of the Jagannath Temple in Puri, Ramayana scenes in the temple art of Bhubaneswar. He has done numerous presentations on his passion, which is art and architecture of the Odisha temples and maritime heritage of Odisha. He has also taken part in excavations at Narisho as principal investigator and Radhanagar as consultant for Dishan Institute of Maritime and Southeast Asian Studies, Odisha government. He has published 3 books, which is Ganesha in Odissan art, Jagannath, Lord of the Universe, Pratna Bharatam, Glory of Archaeology, Art, Epigraphy, and Protection of Cultural Heritage. He has mentored 26 students to their PhD award and 67 students for their MPhil. He also has another passion, which is photography, which complements his passion for temple art and architecture. I'd like to welcome Dr. Sanjay Acharya to deliver his lecture.
So we can proceed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kishore. Esteemed Professor Shiv Shankar Babu, esteemed Dr. Shyama Raman, esteemed Dr. Badri Sheshadri, members present, for the meeting, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, let me thank the members of the Tamil Heritage Trust for having given me this opportunity to speak a few words on a subject of much interest, that is the Gangas and their contribution to the Kalingan style of temple architecture. Before I start my presentation, I would like to just take a few seconds to say that what I have learned today about temples, about temple architecture, few individuals have played very important role in my life. And one is my guide, my professor, Professor Karunasagar Behera, who really mentored me in learning about temples. He was a giant in this area. Unfortunately, he passed away very fast. And the second person is again Dr. Vijay Kumar Ratha, who very recently passed away due to COVID. He was also a very, very well-read person who knew a lot of things. And the third person is Dr. Jivan Kumar Patnaik from the Archaeological Survey of India, who helped me a lot in my visits and in my knowing different aspects. So my acknowledgement to all of them. Now, the time frame given to me is about an hour, and naturally I'll be very brief and would refer to only important points and events and kings. You see, the Eastern Gangas or the Imperial Gangas came to Odisha from Mukhalingam, sometimes about 1110 AD. Their early history is not clear, and we do not have any strong evidence as to what was their links with the Western Gangas. Keeping in view these points, the Gangas of Mysore were Jainas and the Gangas of Kalinga were Saivas. The Gangas of Mysore belong to the Somavamsi lineage and their Gotra was Kanvayana, while the Gangas of Kalinga were Chandravamsis with Aitareya Gotra. And the symbols and seals in the copper plate grants of both the dynasties are different. Now, it is worth mentioning that the Eastern Gangas had already established themselves in Mukhalingam by 496 CE. Though the Gangas ruled Trikalinga region for 5 centuries uninterruptedly, yet due to lack of historical data, historians have not been fully able to settle the genealogy as well as the chronological order of the Gangas. The Ganga era was initiated by the founder ruler, that is Anantavarman I. Dantapura seems to have been the early capital of the Gangas. Hastivarman, a subsequent Ganga ruler whose reign started in 570 CE, styled himself as the king of the whole of Kalinga. He has mentioned in his inscription, Sakala Kalinga, that is the whole of Kalinga. It was he who shifted the capital from Dantapura to Kalinganagara, usually identified with Mukhalingam. Kalinganagara remained the headquarters of the Gangas from the 6th to the 11th century AD. And during this period, the Ganga rulers claimed themselves to be the lord of Kalinga. From the close of the 5th century CE to the early parts of the 11th century CE, the Gangas could not expand their kingdom beyond Trikalinga or south because of the existence of powerful rulers, powerful kingdom of Gongada, which was ruled by the Saladbhavas. Sometimes the time frame is 6th to 7th century. They were in the north. In the south, they had the Eastern Chalukyas. In the east, that is coastal Odisha, they were checked by the Bhumakaras and the Somavamsis from about the 8th century to the 12th century CE. You see, the decline of the Somavamsis in the early part of the 12th century gave an opportunity to the Gangas to expand their kingdom. This opportunity that the Gangas had to expand their kingdom at the cost of the Somavamsis started with the accession of Vajrahasta sometimes in 1038 AD. He was succeeded by his son Devendravarman Rajarajadeva I in 1070 CE, And it was he who defeated Kulatunga and married his daughter Rajasundari. Now, coming down to Anantavarman Chodagangadeva, it is worth mentioning that he was the son and successor of Devendra Varman Rajaraja I. Anantavarman Chodagangadeva, he is the founder of the Ganga rule in Odisha. His time frame is from about 1077 to 1147. And he came into Odisha from Mukhalingam after defeating the last Somavamsi king, Karnadeva. He was a very powerful king, and this is evidenced from his Orni copperplate grant, which he issued in 1112 AD, which mentions about his victory over the king of Vengi and that of Utkal. He also occupied Dandabhukti, which normally is identified with present Midnapur district of West Bengal. And we see that Chodagangadeva inherited the legacy of the Cholas and the Gangas, that is in art, culture, and politics. He has been given several epithets in various inscriptions such as Chalukya Ganga, Vikrama Gangeshwara, Gangeshwara Deva Bhupa, Veera Rajendra Chodaganga, Trikalingadhipati, along with titles like Parama Maheshwara, Parama Vaishnava, Parama Brahmanya. Initially, if you look at the Gangas were Saivas. When we look at them at Mukhalingam, they were Saivas. But with the conquest of Odisha, Anantavarman refers himself to as Parama Vaishnava. And this shift to Vaishnavism was, with all probability, to consolidate his newly conquered territory. Because by the time that he comes over to Odisha, Vaishnavism was in its rise and had become very popular. And Anantavarman Chodagangadeva realized this, and to consolidate his position, he started the construction of the present temple of Jagannath at Puri, which was already a known center for Vaishnavism. He has, to his credit, built the fort at Jajpur, at Amravati near Chhattisgarh, Chodwar, Katak, and Chudangagada at Baram. I'll be coming back to, when I'll start my presentation, I'll be showing those details, which usually is referred to as Panchakataka. These forts were done for the defense of the kingdom. Besides these, he has also built Vishnu temple at Mukhalingam, Srikurumam, and Simachalam. In the annals of Ganga dynasty, after Chodagangadeva, the name of Ananga Bhimadeva III, whose reign is from 1211 to 1238 AD, his great grandson figures very prominently. Ananga Bhimadeva III renewed military campaigns against the Kalachuris and ousted them from the Sambalpur, Sonpur, Bolangir tract, which belonged to the predecessor. The Somavamsis had them, but the Kalachuris had defeated and taken over that region. He again bought it back. Then, very interestingly, after the war, as mentioned in the Ananta Vasudeva temple inscription at Bhubaneswar, he married his daughter Chandrika to the Kalachuri prince Paramaradi Deva, who became the general of the Ganga army during his period and his son's period, that is Narasimha Deva first. And this was probably done to close the age-old hostility between the two kingdoms, that is the Gangas and the Kalachuris. You see, there were a lot of temples that were built during this period, and one of them was the Chattahooda Temple, which has an inscription which refers to a heroic exploit of a person by the name of Vishnu, one of the generals of Ananga Bhimadeva III, against the Muslims of Bengal. Ananga Bhimadeva III's expansion in the south was limited by the Kakatiya king Ganapati, and he had extended his empire up to the river Krishna. And it is probably this that there are many references which says or which mentions that the Ganga empire extended from Ganga to the Godavari. The Kanchipuram inscription reveals that he built Ananga Bhimadeva, that he built a new capital which was named as Abhinava Varanasi Kataka, which corresponds to the modern Katak city. The Draksharam and the Kanchipuram inscription declare him as the Rauta or the deputy of Jagannath, that Jagannath was the ruler and they were ruling the kingdom on his behalf. This he writes down for the first time. For the first time, he puts this in pen and paper in an inscription. This he probably did to win over the loyalty of the feudatories, sometimes in 1216. Anantavarman III was succeeded by his son Narasimhadeva I, whose time frame is from 1238 to 1264 CE. And all of us, we know that Narasimhadeva was well known as a king, for it was he who built the Sun Temple at Konark. He has been ranked as one of the greatest monarchs of Odisha. He was one who had the guts to invade the very stronghold of the Muslims in Bengal and created havoc in their heart. It was he who defeated Tugril Tugan Khan, the Muslim governor of Bengal. And in the next military campaign, the Ganga again gave a humiliating defeat to the Muslims. Even in the south, Narasimhadeva, as known, has defeated the Kakatiya king Ganapati, who had limited Anantavarman III. He was a great devotee of sun, and being a devotee of sun, he has also built a temple of Gopinath at Remuna in the Baleshwar district. From the reign of Chodagangadeva, the Gangas ruled in Odisha for 15 generations uninterruptedly, covering a period of 325 years, 2-3 years in different texts, in different sources, goes off here and there, but we can normally accept that 325 years was the time frame that they ruled, with like covering 15 generations. And very interestingly, these Ganga rulers, they imbibed Odia customs of the local people and the language. And we see that with the coming of the Gangas, the Kalingan style of temple architecture enters into a phase what we call as maturity. The style under them brought in some new features, and we see the creation of temples like the Jagannath Temple at Puri and the Sun Temple at Konark. They are the best creations of the Gangas. Now, all of us will agree that religion has always enriched the social and cultural life and has challenged conventional ways of thinking. And it is thanks to them that the cultural and religious life of Odisha has a distinctive identity of its own. Now, before starting my slide presentation, I would like to touch upon a few points, which I think all of us must know. Man from time immemorial, I've always said that, was worshipping nature in the form of wind, water, rain. And with the passage of time, he was worshipping nature. And with the passage of time, and nature, if you talk about water, if you talk about wind, if we have a shape or water doesn't have a shape, wherever you put in water, it takes that shape. So man wanted something more concrete than abstract, and hence we see that he gave his god anthropomorphic form, and this necessitated habitation, shelter for him. And we see that the concept of house of gods, Devayatana, what we call temples, and started developing, and this structure that developed had regional manifestation. And we see that in the Indian context, 3 styles evolved. The Nagara, which a style that we see in the north, the Dravida style that we see in the south, and the Vesara style that we see in the central part of the country. I'll not talk about the Dravida or the Vesara style. We'll come back to the Nagara style, because as we know, I have to limit myself. This style was spread over 3/4 of northern India, having a fundamental thread that was seen in all the temples, and that was the tower, the torso, the curvilinear spire. And this style was initiated, as far as the north is concerned, by the Guptas, followed by the Kalingas, or followed by the people of Orissa, and then the Chandelas, the Pratyaharas, the Paramaras, and a host of others. All these that I said come within the gamut of what we call as the Nagara style or the North Indian style. What is interesting here, I would like to mention here, that by the 12th century CE, by the time that the Gangas come in, the regional style that had evolved in Odisha had developed to such an extent that it has been referred to as a separate style, maybe because of its prolific character, because of its profusion. And this is mentioned in an inscription seen in the Amriteshwara Temple at Holal in the Bellary district of, like in Karnataka, which mentions about 3 styles: the Nagara, Dravida, and Vesara, along with the Kalingan style. R.D. Banerjee has also referred to this style. And about the profusion that I said, even Ferguson mentions that Odisha had more number of temples than the rest of Hindustan put together. And even Bhubaneswar, if you see, had more than 500 plus temples. That is what is the reference that is given. At present, if you look, we have very few, or quite a few of them have just gone into oblivion. We have 200 plus temples. That itself is a pointer that Odisha had carved out a very distinct place for itself as far as temple architecture is concerned. Very often in different texts, we get a reference that the style that is developed in Kalinga, in Odisha, was a subclass of the Nagara style. Rather, we can put it this way, that it was a regional ramification of the Nagara style in Kalingan region. Now, again, before coming to the points, before coming to my presentation, again, I would like to say that in Odisha, we are fortunate to have a few texts which talk about the Odishan temples, the style, the location, the direction to which it will face, what should be the soil condition. A lot of things are mentioned. One is Bhuvana Pradipa, the second is Silpa Prakasa, one more is Silpa Ratnakosa. These have given us a lot of information regarding Odishan temple architecture. They talk about, like as I said, the place, location, soil on which to be constructed, direction. And one of the texts, that is Bhuvana Pradipa, was taken up by N.K. Bose. He delved deep into the recessions of the Bhuvana Pradipa, and in 1932 he published a text which talks about the style of Odishan temple architecture. And in that text he shows that in Odisha, 3 styles, 3 types of temples, that is the Rekha, the Pidha, and the Khakra style evolved. But in Odisha, if you see beyond the text, beyond the 3, we have 2 more. One is the Gaudiya style, which came in sometimes around the 16th century. We find them in Mayurbhanj, basically Vishnupur influence of Bengal, built in brick. And circular temples, hyperthral temples, the Yogini temples, we have at least 2 of them in Odisha, one at Ranipur in Balangir district and the other at Hirapur near Bhubaneswar. Now, before going into the, again, PowerPoint, I would like to draw attention of all my viewers about the material that is being used in the building of, in the construction of these temples. It is very interesting to note that most of the temples that have been built in Odisha are built of sandstone, maybe because it was available in abundance in Odisha. And again, one has to keep in mind that sandstone was a stone in which fine workmanship could be done. It had that ductile character in itself. Then if you look at the Jagannath temple at Puri, the Sun temple at Konark, and the Madhavananda temple at Madhava, Khondolite has been used as the building material. There's one temple at Kiching in Keonjhar district, that is the Kicha Kashwari temple, which was built around the 11th, 12th century. Chlorite has been used, locally known as Muguni. In the Ganga period, iron has been used, iron beams have been used to support. And more so we see this in Konark. These temples of Odisha are astyler in character. That is, we normally do not have any supporting pillars, but in Jagannath Temple, 4 pillars have been given inside as to support the roof of the Jagamohana. They are of the dry masonry order, that is, no bonding material has been used. And now, before coming to the evolution of Odishan temple style, in Odisha, we see that temples start sometimes around 6th, 7th century AD and continues uninterruptedly up to the 13th century. And from 11th to 13th, we can phase them into 3 periods. The early phase, 6th, 7th to 9th century, transitional phase, specifically 10th century, and mature phase, 11th to 13th century CE. We must also have one more point in mind, that is, these are not watertight compartments. In fact, each has influenced the other, has passed on features to the next. Like the transitional has looked into the early phase, brought in features, introduced new features, and has passed on to the later period, the mature phase. Mature phase has looked back at the transitional, adopted features, elements, and has built. It's something like a relay race. It's something like a relay race. That is something very interesting in Odisha, that different dynasties between 6th, 7th century to 13th century, different dynasties were there. Like, for example, Sailodbhavas, then the Bhumakaras, then the Somavamsis, then the Gangas. But very interestingly, though they were politically different dynasties, but as far as their contribution to the specific style, that is Kalingan architecture, that was not interrupted. It continued as a relay race. The baton that the Sailodbhavas gave was carried forward by the Bhumakaras. What the position where the Bhumakaras left, the Somavamsis took over, and when the Gangas defeated the last Somavamsi king Karnadeva, they took over the style from that point. That is something very interesting to see in Odisha. Each dynasty developed a brilliant temple building tradition inherited from the predecessor. Temples like Brahmeshwara and the Lingaraj served as models for the Gangas. They continued the style with improvements and new additions. Now, I would like to tell my viewers that the Gangas, when they came in, they brought in the style that was already there with the Somavamsis. They not only continued with the style, but they introduced new elements, new features. Now, I'll very briefly talk about the very few, like the features that they introduced. The Ganga monuments usually stand on a raised platform. They rarely start abruptly from the earth. That is a platform which we call as pistor was added to their temple. A temple which normally had a pistor, a raised platform, like somebody might say that Rajarani Temple and the Mukteshwara Temple at belonging to the Somavamsi period has a platform. Yes, they do, but they are very small platforms. But when you come down to the Ganga period, they have quite like high platforms, which is best exemplified when we look at the Sun Temple at Konark. I'll be showing all the photographs. They continued with the basic plan and elevation of the Somavamsis, but with addition of, like earlier we had seen, from Triratha to Pancharatha, from Pancharatha to Saptaratha. Like with the Gangas, we see that they improved the elevation of the temple, and from Pancharatha, that is 5 projections, they made it to 7. Saptaratha plan came in. In addition to the Deoda and the Jagamohana, right? That is the sanctum, sanctorum, and the sanctum and the hall of audience. They added one more, and that was the Nata Mandapa. Nata Mandapa came in and the height of the Nata Mandapa was lesser than that of the Jagamohana. One more feature they added, that was they added subsidiary shrines in front of the Parshva Devatas. Earlier, we do not see, till the Somavamsis, we do not see any subsidiary shrines in front of the Parshva Devata image. Now they started introducing subsidiary shrines in front of the Parshva Devata. And very interestingly, again, we see that the Vahana Stamba, another very notable feature that was added during the Ganga period. Like in a Shiva temple, you had a pillar on which the bull was there. In a Vishnu temple, you had Garuda, and in a Surya temple, we had Aruna. The appearance of consorts of Digpalas, like we see that with the coming in of the Somavamsi somewhere around the 11th century, we see that Digpalas have come in. Rajarani Temple, which we call as Indreshwara Temple, we see Digpalas have already come in. But here, along with the Digpalas, their consorts have come in the upper portion of the Janga. In the upper Janga, the Digpalas, like the consorts of the Digpalas, have now come in. And one more feature last that I would like to say, that with the coming of the Gangas, we see that the style is reaching a climax, and we see that there is a irresistible drive for ornamentation. Like if you look at the temple swells with vigor, and if you look at the scroll work, it has animals, birds, like something very specific to the period. The decorative diamond cuttings in the wall of the temples, all these things, like you see profusion coming in. And along with architecture, sculpture was also coming up. Like when we look at a sculpture, and looking at the sculpture, you can say that this sculpture belongs to the 12th century, or this sculpture is of the, like along with architecture, there was sculptural development in these temples. Like it's very nicely said that art is the very soul of an architectural monument. And these decorative motifs help us in tentatively working out a chronology for the temples of Odisha. Now, the last point I would again like to say that very often you might read in early books which mentions, like I said, that temple architecture in Odisha started somewhere around the 6th century. Very often you will find that it is said that from what was happening from 1st century AD BC to the 6th, 7th century AD. Early books have mentioned that it was a period of inactivity, or what they said was Dark Age. But if you really look into, with the recent discoveries, with the recent excavations at Ratnagiri, Lalitgiri, Udayagiri, and a host of other sites, we see that it was not inactive. It was absolutely active. That creative faculty of the people of Odisha, the artisans of Odisha, was absolutely active. Like in Hathi Gumpa inscription, I'll be showing that photograph. In Hathi Gumpa inscription, Kharaboda mentions that because of a cyclone, that when he comes into power, and that prior to his coming, there was a cyclone, and that cyclone had destroyed the forts and other ramparts, which he repaired. And he also writes that he spent a certain amount for the repair of temples. So the first question comes in here, that temples did exist in, or were in existence in the 1st century CE, which is referred to in the Hathi Gumpa inscription, and that maybe they were built of perishable material for which at present we do not have them as evidence. Now I think I'll come down to my presentation and run through till 12th century fast, and then from 12th century I'll go slow. Right, this is forepart of an elephant, which is datable to the 3rd century BCE. It's normally referred to as a product of the Mauryan period after the Kalinga War. Below this is the inscription of Ashoka, and this is the region of Dhauli. And contemporary to this is another location. This location, I would like everybody would agree, was before even that forepart of that elephant. This is Sisupalagoda Fort in Bhubaneswar, which was like, which normally is accepted was the capital of the king, or capital of the system that was governing Orissa when the Kalinga war took place. And from that point, I come down to the Hathigumpha inscription. This is the inscription location of the Hathigumpha. This is Udaygiri in Bhubaneswar, 1st century CE, datable to the time of Kharavada. The inscription is that of Kharavada. And here we have lot of, like, there are not only, this is not the only cave, there are other locations, other caves here in this where you can see a lot of sculptures. Now I'll revert back to from 1st century CE to temple architecture. This is a typical Rekha Deula. I was talking about 3 styles, Rekha, Pidha and Khakra. This is a typical Rekha Deula. This, when you see something like this, it's a typical Odishan Rekha Deula. This is a typical Pidha Deula. Together they make a temple. Rekha and Pidha, together they make a temple. This is a typical Khakra Deula. And when one notices such sort of a structure, one can very comfortably say that the deity enshrined in this is a female divinity. These are the 3 that I had showed. This is the 4th one that we have in Mayurbhanj, in Haripur Goda. This is the influence of Vishnupur, the influence of Bengal, which we call as the Gaudiya style, basically built of brick. And this is the 5th type of temples that is also seen in Odisha. This is the Chausati Yogini temple, that is the hypathral temple, or what all of us know as circular temples, right? And Odisha has 2 of them, one at very close to Bhubaneswar at Hirapur, and the second is at Ranipur in the Bolangir district. Now I'll very briefly point out that when we look at a Rekha Deula, this is the segmentation that is done like a human body. This is up to the waist, this is up to the neck, and this is the neck and head portion. We call it as Bada, Gondi, and Mastaka. And like this is the feet. Okay, here you have 5 divisions, the Pabhaga, then you have the Tolajanga, like the lower thigh, then this is the knee, and this is the upper jangha, and this is the Bandhana, Varanda. Absolutely designed in the style of a human body, cosmic Purusha. Same is that with the Pidha Deula, and same is that with the Khakra Deula. They have been very beautifully divided into Bada, Gondi, and Mastaka. Because of short of time, I'm not going into details of the elements. Now, I was talking about the early temples of Odisha, like early phase, that is from 6th, 7th to 9th century. I'll run through fast. This is one of the earliest temples, the Shatrughaneshwara group, where you see that he has the capacity to create a structure. He has the capacity to build a temple, but as yet that capacity is latent. When you look at this temple, you'll see that the material that he has used is more than what is required. The temple is stocky, like more material has been used than the required amount. You don't have any Jagamohana in front. But when you proceed to the next, this is a drawing from a picture from the book of Ferguson, picturesque illustrations, where he has given us the status of the temple, which now after conservation is this. This is the Parsurameshwara temple. And here we see that for the first time, he's building the Jagamohana in front. And the Jagamohana is not a Pidha Deula, it's a flat roof. It's a flat roof structure. And very importantly, they are not built together. First, the temple has been built, and then the Jagamohana has been superimposed. The Jagamohana has been superimposed over the Deula. Again, another drawing from the book of Ferguson. This is the Vaitara temple that I had shown. this is the present structure. This is a temple dedicated to Chamunda inside Bhubaneswar city itself. This is a khakra type of temple which can be dated to the 8th century AD. This is the Mahishasura Mardini image as one of the Parsva Devata. Here is a beautiful Ardhanarishwara image, and in the front you have the Vajramastaka, which has Shiva in Urdhava Linga in a dance posture with Surya in his chariot, and the 7 horses with Usha and Pratyusha on 2 sides. After that, we come down to this. That is, like, we finished, like I just showed 2 temples to show the early phase. Now we come down to the transitional phase, where I would show just 1 temple, that is the Mukteshwara temple. With the coming in of this, that was the photograph of Ferguson, and this is presently what it is. The temple of Mukteshwara, like very often it's mentioned as the gem of Odishan temple architecture, dream realized in sandstone, the handsomest of the handsome. Lot of epithets have been given to this temple, because by the time that he's building this temple in the transitional phase, he has by now understood the material that he's using and what he has to, what is going to be his output. For the first time in this temple, we see that we have a Pidha Deula, Pidha Jagamohana, a Deula which is short but absolutely proportionate. For the first time, he is introducing a gateway in front of the temple with a low compound wall encompassing the whole temple. This is the only one that you see. There is another temple near Gop in Boyas Bati, Gangeshwara temple, but this what you call this ornamental torana is there, but integrated into the temple. With the Mukteshwara temple, we see that he has by now learnt what elegance is, and he has introduced quite a few new elements in this temple. Now from Mukteshwara, when we pass into the mature phase, the first temple that is being built during the 11th century CE is the Rajarani temple. And interestingly, I would like to say here that Bhubaneswar is such a city where from the beginning, from the 6th, 7th century till 13th century, you have evidence of temples. You have evidence of each period, all temples, from 6th to 13th century. That is something very interesting that one can see in Bhubaneswar. This is the Indrashwara temple, the Rajarani, popularly known as the Rajarani temple. Very often people say that this is very close to the, like in design and style and everything, it is close to the Khanderiya Mahadeva temple. But I would say that this is again a typical Odishan temple with all elements, with all features. But the only new thing that he has added in this temple for the first time are these Angasikharas or turrets, which are in the round and for which the temple looks like the tummy is bulging. It bulges out in the Gondi portion. That is why often people say this is very similar to the Khanderiya Mahadeva temple. But I would like to say for the audience that this is absolutely in the style of the Odishan temple architecture. You can see how beautiful sculptures have come in. Now, after the Indrashwara temple, Rajarani temple, we have the Brahmeshwara temple. And by the time the Brahmeshwara temple is, or by the time this temple is being built, we see that the directions that they were looking for, new additions and other things, like things have now been settled. This is the Panchayat Temple, like you have the central temple here, like a Jagamohana, and in four corners of the campus, of the compound, you have 4 subsidiary shrines similar to the main shrine. That is something very, very interesting. And when we look at this temple, Brahmeshwara temple, it's not a very high temple, it's not a very large temple, but we'll see that all features of a typical Odishan temple has evolved. And then, like, you can see beautiful images in the temple. Now from Brahmeshwara, I jump into the Lingaraj temple, because this is the temple from where the Gangas take over. this is the last temple that the Somavamsis have built. This is again a photograph from the same book. This is the present status of the temple along with the Bindu Sagara. On this side, you can see the Anantavarman Temple, and here is the Lingaraj Temple along with the Bindu Sarovara. This is from a picture from inside the temple, the Deola and the Jagamohana. When the temple was built by the Somavamsis for Shiva. For Shiva, that is the Deola and the Jagamohana, they were built by the Somavamsis, and it was dedicated to Shiva. And with the coming, like later on, you will see that with the coming in of the Gangas, they have added 2 more units, the Natamandapa, into this temple, and subsidiary shrines have been added later to this temple, all features of the Ganga period. And this temple, if you look at, caters to both Shiva and Vishnu. It was a temple initially built for Shiva, but later on the affiliation was for Shiva and Vishnu. Harihara Temple. This is again a daytime view of the same picture that I showed earlier. This is again another picture that I wanted to show because Ferguson has given in his a drawing of this, and I thought that initially when I saw that drawing it was a figment of his imagination, because Lingaraj Temple and this Bindusagara is quite a bit of distance, and I never thought of that the Lingaraj Temple in reflection can be seen. He has done that in his drawing. So when I saw that, I showed this in a photograph. And this is, you can see how that by the time that the Lingaraj Temple is being built by the Somavamsis, to what extent the tradition of sculptural art has evolved and developed. This is an image of Agni as one of the Digapalas. Now, after the Lingaraj Temple, we see that with the coming in of Chodagangadeva, we see the construction of, like, by the time that Chodagangadeva is coming in, Vaishnavism was in its rise in Odisha. People were clamoring for a temple, and Chodagangadeva used that for his advantage to consolidate his empire, to bring in the people together, and he started the construction of this present temple. Unfortunately, I'll not be able to show more photographs of Jagannath Temple because it is like, one is not permitted to go inside and shoot different elements and different aspects of the temple. So this is a view of the Jagannath Temple. Unfortunately, again, it would be difficult to take this photograph because this was taken from the Emara Motha, which now has been, like, it was in very bad shape. It is now demolished. So this is a digital image which has been put together and has been created. And with the creation of the Jagannath Temple, we see that if you look at the Jagannath Temple and the Lingaraj Temple, by the time Lingaraj is being built, maybe in the entire country, such huge temples have not been constructed. And when we look at the Jagannath Temple at Puri, we'll see that it's just a replica of the Jagannath Temple, but a replica of the Lingaraj Temple. Lingaraj is Saivite in character, Jagannath Temple is Vaishnavite in character, but in a much, much larger format. Here also, the initially we'll see that the 2 units, the Deola and the Jagamohana, was built during the time of Anantavarman Chodagangadeva. The Nata Mandapa was built later, and then the Bhoga Mandapa was built again thereafter. This is a close view. Like, it has 2 different walls, like one can talk about like something like a fortification. One is the Meghanada Pachiri, the first one, Meghanada wall, and the second, this is a close view. This is the Kuruma Beda of the temple. This is where you enter into the temple, and here you have all the 4 units: the Bhoga Mandapa, the Nata Mandapa, the Jagamohana, and the Deola, the temple or the Sanctum Sanctorum, which houses the images of the 3 of the Trinity, of the 3 Jagannath, Balabhadra, and Subhadra. Now, after I have taken a different sequence, I would just like to show whatever photographs I had of the Ganga temples, I would like to show that after the Jagannath temple, I come back to the Megheshwar temple in Bhubaneswar, and you see this temple is devoid of sculptures, but you can see the Jagamohana, that how differently it is styled. And interestingly, you will see that these columns in the front, these Naga pillars in the front, if you look at Mukteshwara 10th century, you'll see that the serpent hood is lower, it is in descending order, and the tail is on the top. And here you see, by the time that you come down to the later period, you find that the hood is on the top and the tail is below. Then from the Megheshwar temple, there is another temple which is again another creation of the Somavamsis, the Sobhaneshwara temple in Niyali, that is in the Prachi Valley. You have a location which is Niyali. You have this temple which again belongs to the Ganga period. Again in Cuttack, you have the Madhavananda. You have the Madhavananda temple at a place in Madhava. And then this is a very interesting picture of another temple not far off from Bhubaneswar at Garudi Panchana. The temple is the Buddhanatha temple, right? And this is the restored picture. This is the earlier picture. This is what the status was somewhere around 25 years back when I had taken this photograph. And this is the recent picture of the temple after restoration. One can very clearly see the restoration and the difference in the construction. And this is a very, very beautiful image of Parvati as Parshava Devata in the temple. After that, I come down to the next temple again they have a huge contribution to Odishan temple architecture. This is the temple of Gopinath at Kakudia near Pipili. Pipili, everybody knows, is well known for applique work. And now from Kakudia, I come back to the Lingaraj campus, and inside the campus, a Parvati temple has been built dedicated to Parvati. And this was by the Gangas. And here you can see all the four elements: the Deula, Jagamohana, small Natamandapa, and a Bhogamandapa, specifically for Parvati, being built by the Gangas inside the Lingaraj campus. And then we come down to the Sun Temple, which was again another massive contribution, one of the greatest contribution of the contribution of the Gangas. This was by Narasimhadeva first. What is happening? It's just automatically going out.
So I don't know exactly what you clicked on. Maybe you might have clicked on some automatic slideshow mode.
Okay. Now this is again a view of the earlier one was a view of the Sun Temple Konark from the southeast side. This is again a view of the same temple Konark. I'll be talking about this temple at length because this is one of the major contribution of the Gangas. This is from the northwest view of the temple. This is the front view. Presently, you can't have this. You won't be able to see the temple in this view because other structures have come up. This is again a view from the southeast. This is the view of the temple. The platform that I was talking about, that the Sun Temple, the Sun Temple at Konark, has been conceived in a very different manner. It's a typical Odishan temple, but it has been conceived in the form of a chariot with 24 wheels and 7 horses in the front drawing the chariot. And the Natamandapa is at a distance from the two structures that I had just. You can see this is the main temple has collapsed, This is the view of the Jagamohana. This is the Nata Mandapa. There is a gap here. And this is the platform. This is the platform which has been conceived in the form of a chariot with 24 wheels. And in the front, it had 7 horses that were drawing the chariot for Surya. And this is one of the wheels. This is one of the wheels and the panels that you can see. This is the pista that I was talking about earlier. That this was an introduction that they gave, that they had during, like, this was one of a very good contribution of the Gangas. And this pista is quite high, where you can see that how ornamentation has, profusion of ornamentation has taken over. This is a view of, like, when you look at the temple, you will feel yourself that here are the wheels that is drawing the temple and the Jagamohana together. These are the panels in the pista of the temple. The main temple has collapsed. I'll very briefly again talk about it. And this is the Parsva Devata that we have in the north. This is the Parsva Devata in the west. And this is the Parsva Devata in the south. Absolute intact images. You see, the Sun Temple has often, of Odisha, has often been referred to as the Black Pagoda. And if you look at it, it is undoubtedly one of the finest monuments of mankind. Sadly, this temple, built in the 13th century, is now in ruins. The present temple was built in the reign of the Ganga king Narasimhadeva I, that is between 1238 to 1264, as is evidenced from the copperplate charter of his successor Narasimhadeva II, which is dated to 1295 AD. By 1626 AD, the temple was already deserted and worship had ceased. The main temple had disintegrated and the remaining fragments collapsed sometimes in 1848 by a strong gale. The plinth of the temple, that is the platform on which the temple stands, was buried in sand. The Jagamohana was more or less intact, and this was filled up with sand in 1903 by the orders of the then Lieutenant Governor of Bengal, as this was considered the only way to preserve the monument. Even in ruins, the temple is magnificent. In March, 22nd March 1915, the temple was declared a centrally protected monument, and since 1939, Archaeological Survey of India has been given the responsibility for the conservation and preservation of the monuments. And in 1984, the temple was included in the list of World Heritage Sites for its outstanding universal value to humanity. Over the centuries, legends and oral traditions have made this temple more or less mysterious. That is, did the builders finish the temple? There are a lot of questions about this temple. Was it consecrated? When did the temple collapse? You see, this place, Konark, is known in different names. In different texts, there are different references. Orkotirtha, Mitravana, Padmakhetra, Mitravana. All these are different names that has been given to this place. The traditional story regarding the erection of the first Sun Temple at Mitravana is mentioned in the Samba Purana. According to the legend mentioned in the Madala Panji, that is the Madala Panji is the Jagannath Temple Chronicle. Sivai Samantrai was the superintendent who was in charge of the construction of the temple. There is another legend which mentions that Vishu Maharana was the master craftsman of this temple. We see Jagannath Temple of Puri was a temple that was built earlier to the Sun Temple. But unfortunately, as far as the Sun Temple is concerned, we do not have any records as to when it collapsed or the questions that I put in. The temple faces east. It stands, as I said, it stands on a platform which has 24 wheels drawn by 7 horses. On this platform stands the temple and the Jagamohana. The entire design of the temple is in the form of a chariot, as I have already said. Some have said that quite a few have in their books have said that it does not conform to the typical Odissan style. It does conform to the typical Odissan style. And the only thing is that a platform has been introduced on which the temple and the Jagamohana stand. The Nata Mandapa stands at a distance from the Jagamohana, and between the two, that is the chariot design which carried the temple and the Jagamohana and the Nata Mandapa, between the place stood the Aruna Stamba, which was like once the temple collapsed, it was removed, and presently it is in front of the Jagannath Temple, Puri, and this was done by the Marathas sometimes in the later part of the 18th century. And if you look at the wheels are 9 feet 9 inches in height. The platform on which the temple stands is about 13 feet 3 inches, and the conjectured height of the temple is 228 feet. The temple plan is Pancharatha. The Jagamohana has 4 very beautifully, very exquisitely carved doorways, which now are sealed. In the vicinity of the temple, on the backside to the southwest, is the temple of Chaya Devi. You have the Deola and the Jagamohana remains. Remains of a brick temple is also seen on the southwest corner of the compound. Recently, when excavation was done because of waterlogging inside the campus, when excavations were done, a kitchen has been excavated on the southeastern corner. And as I have said, this temple has used huge blocks of stones and iron beams have been used. These are the life-size images of like sculptures in the space between the portals in the Jagamohana. This is a Martanda Bhairava here, and the Martanda Bhairava is dancing over a boat, and looking at this, like normally the boat tradition of Odisha is referred to. Here is a very interesting image in the same temple, which shows a king, a royal figure sitting on an elephant and a giraffe being presented by a person dressed with a headgear and like looks like a Arab or a foreign traveler, and he is presenting a giraffe. So when you see, giraffe is not an animal which belongs to Asia. So talking about this, like we talk about the maritime traditions of Odisha. Here again is a beautiful panel which shows like the worship of Jagannath, Durga, Mahishasuramardini Durga, and Shiva. Here is again another beautiful panel in the temple with a Vyala image of a composite animal standing on front, like on top of a crouching elephant. And here is a Nagi column with the serpent hood on the top. This is again a very beautiful picture from the book of Ferguson, which shows the the Jagamohana and a portion of the temple standing, which collapsed in 1848 in a gale, as mentioned. This is a view of the entire temple. Here, the iron beams that have been bought from the temple, you can see the iron beams here. And very interestingly, these iron beams over ages are lying there very close to the sea, but they have not, there is no rust in it. So that's the technology that the Odissan people had developed. This is the Nata Mandapa, this is the Jagamohana, and this is the platform that you can see, and this is the raised platform. The temple and the Jagamohana also had such a raised platform. This is again a very interesting picture that we got from the India Office Library. This is from the logbook of Berkeley Castle, where he writes in 1680 he was crossing that way, and he has mentioned about B Pagoda. So normally we expect that the temple was standing because he has shown the Deola and maybe a Jagamona, a very rough drawing. This is one of the arguments by historians that by this period the temple was standing. This is again another drawing by Andrew Sterling, which shows two pujaris standing in front of the doorway, which is open in 1825. So that normally would dispel probably the. I'm not going into those details, that the temple was, whether it was consecrated or not. This is another image which we collected from the British Library, London, which shows the interior of the Jagamona before it was filled in 1903. That portions have collapsed, for which probably they filled in sand. And this is again what I was talking about, that after the collapse of the temple, that sand had filled up the entire Jagamona, and the platform that we are seeing now was completely buried in sand. This was the status, and from this it has been recovered. These are very rare images. This is again another picture from the India Office Library, which shows Konark Temple in 1820. A temple standing just like a mast, like a ship and a mast standing. This is again another view in 1809, again from the India Office Library collection. You can see the temple and the sand, the Jagamona and the mast standing. This is a conjectured elevation of the Sun Temple Konark by James Ferguson. This is again another picture from by Ferguson that we have in his book. And this was the Navagraha slab that we have presently near the temple. This probably was being planned to be taken away, but like you can see iron balls below here, so that they can slide and take it. But because it was so heavy, they were not able to transport. Just think the manner in which the builder had taken these slabs and had built the temple. And as I said, that we normally refer to the Sun Temple as Black Pagoda. In the evening, if you look at the temple, this is how it looks. Jagannath Temple was referred to as the White Pagoda, and this was the Black Pagoda. Jagannath Temple was plastered with lime. That is why we didn't have any sort of what we call moss in it. And here in this temple, because it was stone, normally there was moss, and once there was moss, it looked black. This is another temple belonging to the Ganga period. This is the Sari Deola in Bhubaneswar. Recent excavations are on in this location. A lot of new findings are coming out. This is again a very recent photograph. This is the Chitrakarani Temple belonging to the Ganga period. It's devoid of any sculptures. Later Ganga period temple, very close to, just next to the compound wall of the Lingaraj Temple. This is another temple where we have an inscription which dates the temple to 1278 AD. Anantavarman Temple, which has all the 4 units of the temple. It's a beautiful temple dedicated to Vishnu on the banks of the Bindu Sarovar. This is again another temple close to the like in the old town region of Bhubaneswar. This is the Yamashira Temple belonging to the Ganga period. Later Ganga temples. This is again the Somnath Temple at Budhapada. This is a very beautiful temple. Very beautiful temple. Once one sees the sculptures in this temple, these sculptures, one will be astounded at the workmanship of the Ganga sculptor. This is the Okeshwar Temple. You can see that I was talking about Saptaratha, Pancharatha, Saptaratha. This is again Navaratha Temple. Very rare temple that you find. You have 9 projections in the temple. Normally, the majority of the temples have 5 projections, but there are temples belonging to this period where you have 7 and 9. These are some of the forts that were built This is the Amaravati Fort near Chatia. It's all devastated, but whatever little remains, we have this photograph. This is the Chodagangadeva near Barang, close to Bhubaneswar. There's another fort that was done by Chodagangadeva. And this is again the Baravati Fort in Cuttack, monumental structure by Anantavarman Chodagangadeva III. And with this, I finish my presentation. Thank you. I hope I have limited myself within the time frame that I was allotted, or maybe I have just exceeded a few minutes. Thank you, sir. Thank you all for listening to me. Now, over to Seshadri Babu.
Yes, sir. There are some questions, and I would like to have we have time, so we can talk for another 10 minutes, 10-15 minutes, if it's fine with you.
Can I stop sharing?
Yes, you can stop sharing.
Right.
Thank you. So there are, of course, there are some standard questions. There are some interesting, points of view presented in the YouTube channel. One question from Mr. Ramaswamy is that this question is not about Gangas, but since you're not about Gangas themselves, but you had mentioned about the Hathigumpha inscription of King Karavela, where there is a mention of Seva Devatayana Shankara Harako, which means repair of all shrines of gods. So has there been any evidence of temples constructed during the times of Karavela or before his times? That's his question.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir. He mentions that he repaired temples, the fort, and other things. But unfortunately, we do not have any evidence. There is absolutely not one evidence to show that what was the style of temple, what was the structure, or anything. So the only excuse that one can make to escape is that maybe they were made of perishable material, bamboo or wood, for which maybe it has perished. That's the only answer that we have. He writes so that the argument is that there were, but at present, absolutely there is no evidence.
Also, even in the narrative sculptures across the Udayagiri caves, in particular, and of course, the Rani Gumpha, the first big one, you only have not a temple-like structure, but a tree being worshipped, tree with the railings around. So, if there were worship places, there is no even the sculptural evidence, because there is a lot of narrative sculptures. They could have depicted something there, probably. I'm just wondering.
Sir, with all probability, we don't have any evidence. It is just I also say one more point I would like to draw my attention to my kind viewers, that I have myself gone to different places, and I have come to a conclusion that maybe these decorative motifs and the other things that we have was not the monopoly of any one religion. Wherever the sculptor went, whatever he had imbibed in his whatever he had learned, he put that. If a Jaina king called him, in the Jaina structure, he put that. If a Saiva king called him, he put that in the Saiva structure. If a Buddhist called him, he put that pattern, that design in the Buddhist structure. That is what I have personally felt. I may be corrected.
One interesting thing is, across India, the Jaina and the Hindu structures are more or less the same. Except for perhaps the designs and the sculptures and maybe some embellishments, maybe little austere or not. Whether it is in Tamil Nadu, whether it is in the Eastern India, whether it is in Western India, Central India, wherever you go, there is not much of, from the structure itself. But the Buddhist structure is distinct, different. The the chaityas, the viharas are completely different at the very, very fundamental level, right?
Definitely.
Is there any, anyone who has done a work on trying to understand why that is the case? Not that it, it shouldn't be that way. It is. That's what it is. That's what the available evidence is.
Yes. I did also think of that when I was studying the Buddhist structures, that why did they adopt the circle, and why did the the Brahminical temples that we have throughout the country, why did they adopt the square? If you look at all the temples, like as far as Odisha temples are concerned, like excepting perhaps the Khakra temple, which is oblong, the rest are all square and multiples of square. It looks round, but if you look at the plan of the temple, it is square. It is square and multiples of square. So now, what was the reason as to why they adopted the circle and why we adopted or the Hindus adopted the square is very difficult to say. One book I had read, he had written very nicely that there was a like the ball, the circle, and the square, the cube. That is what he has written, collided together, and when they fell, the cube had 2-3 turns and then stabilized, and the ball started rolling and rolled over beyond the boundaries of this country, and it became more popular outside the country than the place where it had originated. This was one of the arguments that I had read. I'm forgetting the name of the book. It was quite an interesting interpretation that the person had done.
Okay. So one of the interpretation which I read is that the worshipping of, or I don't even want to use the word worship. Let's say the sacredness of a mound-like structure was there even for the Jainas at the same time as the Buddhists were creating such mound-like structure even during the time of the life of Buddha. Even when he was alive, and there were other some of his students when they died, they formed this. But somewhere along the way, the elevation of the Tirthankaras as godlike, then it started moving almost similar to the Hindu system of worshipping gods, whereas the Buddhists, while they later on developed, particularly the Vajrayana sect, creating a whole set of gods, still somehow maintained that mound-like structure. And there were, obviously the Lalitagiri, Ratnagiri, Udayagiri complex in Odisha does show plenty of the bodhisattvas and the Buddhas that you worship, but they've been maintaining that mound, like the hemisphere maintained, and then you put Buddhas and bodhisattvas all around to worship. So somehow they sort of maintained it, while the Jainas and the Jainas and the Hindus moved on a different thing. One more question from Mr. Ramaswamy again. So he should have modified his question differently. You did talk about the Khakra Deol of the Vaital Deol temple. His question is, are there planting examples of it? Obviously, there is one, but maybe I will modify it to show, are there more such Khakra Deol version of temples in Odisha?
Definitely. You have excellent examples, because I was confining my talk, because the time frame was short. I was confining my talk to the Gangas, and the Gangas are in the 12th century. So there are beautiful temples. The Varahi temple at Chorasi is a fantastic example. Is a fantastic example of the Vaitara style.
Okay.
You have a Gangeshwari temple at Barashbati. You have in Bhubaneswar the very close to the Mukteshwara temple. The I'm just one inside the Lingaraj temple. You have the Savitri temple, and then Gauri temple in Bhubaneswar. Gauri temple, another example of Vaitara. You have at Baidyanath another temple of the Khakra style. But as they do not fit into this period, I naturally skipped all of them because of lack of time. That's the only reason that I have. Otherwise, I would have loved to talk on those temples. They have something very unique as far as Odisha is concerned.
Okay. And coming back to your, you started with the Shatrughaneshwara temple, and very nicely showed how there was this evolution in terms of the sophistication in building the temples, and also the addition. So starting from, in a sense, Shatrughaneshwara to Lingaraja, Puri Jagannath and the Konark Sun Temple. In this evolution of how it has been, is it that it is only that linear evolution, or there was a lot of back and forth where even after the 4-segment with Jagmohana, Natamandapa, and Bhogamandapa, you had temples that were constructed with a simple Garbhagriha and Jagmohana alone?
Yes. You see, major temples like Lingaraj, Anantavarman, Chodagangadeva, like they had all the 4 units, not all the temples. Temples initially, when we look at the Odishan temples, when we say a typical Odishan temple, it is the Deola and the Jagamohana, not all the 4. Not all the 4. As I said, that the platform, which was a contribution of the high platform, which was a contribution of the Gangas. Like all Ganga temples do not have platforms, but a temple which has a high platform belongs to the Ganga period. These are identifying marks. In the same manner, we do not have all the 4. The 2, the Deola and the Jagamohana, are the most important 2 units which basically define a typical Odishan temple.
Okay. There is a question from Dr. Kumud Kanitkar, who's one of our speakers in this seminar series. So she wants to know what is inside the mandapa of the Baital Devas. One does not get a chance to enter, but the Saptamatrikas may be inside. So this is her
yes,
question.
absolutely. With Chamunda in the center, you have all the Saptamatrikas. Unfortunately, she has not been able to visit. If you time your visit in the morning, you will definitely be able to see all the like you can go inside the temple and see all the matrikas.
Okay.
They're absolutely beautifully sculptured images inside the temple.
Okay.
Even if you have seen Mukteshwar Temple, Mukteshwar Temple is another temple where on the ceiling, normally Odishan temples, inside the temple we do not have any carvings. They are kept absolutely plain. But if you go into Mukteshwara and look at the ceiling is very beautifully carved in a trapezoidal manner, with a central lotus. In the petals, you have all the Saptamatrikas with babies in the lap. That is again something very interesting. For Surameshwara Temple in the Jagamohana, you have another panel of Saptamatrikas flanked by Virabhadra and Ganesha.
But that is on the outer.
Yes.
No, I remember, we had this site seminar where we visited not all the places, but certainly we spent a lot of time in Bhubaneswar, went to Puri and to Konark, etc. And all of our team members were there on the floor trying to take the images of the Mukteshwara. And I remember very well the the carvings on the roof, which I can only compare to on the eastern side, like in some of the Gujarat temples, the the kind of carvings that you would see in some of the Chalukyan. The kind of the commonality that for us, let me say, the new ones to this space, as we go around the country and see from one place to another, the closeness, though regions are far away, the closeness in terms of the themes, the ideas, the sculptural patterns, etc., they are quite fascinating, actually. One question, you did talk about it in the beginning, somewhere along the way, about the number of temples in Odisha. That it is sort of equal to or greater than the number of temples across the rest of India. Right?
That may not be correct, but basically, probably what he has written is to say that in Odisha, a huge number of temples. You could see a lot of temples.
Absolutely,
probably for that he has written.
Our own observations. We talk of Kanchipuram in Tamil Nadu as one such town where whichever street you go, there are temples, and even we can say, without doing any census or anything, that the number of temples in Bhubaneswar certainly is more than that of Kanchipuram, without doubt. Just roam in the streets of Bhubaneswar, I'm not even taking the whole of Odisha, just one city, Bhubaneswar to Kanchipuram, Bhubaneswar perhaps to Kumbakonam. These are two major temple cities of Tamil Nadu. Certainly, Bhubaneswar will outscore these two. Is there a detailed census that has been taken of every single temple that's there across Odisha?
Probably yes. Not maybe not all the temples, but probably yes. IGNCA had like our department had done it for IGNCA, and they have put it up in their website. Most of the temples have been covered. Most, if you say all, I would say not all, but majority of the temples have been covered in that survey that was done. But that was restricted not for the whole of Odisha. It was restricted to Puri. It was done for Cuttack and those locations. 2 books have also come out by intent.
Okay. Interesting, because I've just modified a question from one of the viewers to sort of present it in a more neutral sense. So thank you. That was really useful. Getting to know the entire expanse of the Odishan architecture, starting with the Dhauli elephant, and of course the Shishpalgarh fort, and moving along, of course the Karavelan or the that particular period. We don't know whether Karavela himself built all the Utegiri, of course not. But then, that's probably the earliest in that particular space. And then moving on to the entire, what we now call as a Kalingan architecture. Thank you for that entire breadth of history as well as architecture and a whole bunch of sculptures. Thank you very much. Let me invite Kishore to thank you, and then also introduce the next speaker. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Dr. Acharya.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Acharya, for this excellent talk.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We'd like to invite our next speaker, Dr. Shrikant Ganvir, who is going to talk.
Do I log out?
No, you can leave it, sir. If
I can leave.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, over to you, Kishore.
We're happy to welcome Dr. Shrikant Ganvir, our next speaker, who is going to talk to us about the Paramaras of Malwa, who patronage the Bhumija style temples in the Malwa region. Dr. Shrikant Ganvir is assistant professor in the Department of AIHC and Archaeology, Deccan College Postgraduate and Research Institute, Pune. He's visiting faculty at Department of Pali and Buddhist Studies, Savitribai Phule Pune University, Pune. He was a co-director of excavations at Nagardan and Phanigiri. He also participated in the Rajagala Archaeological Research Project in Sri Lanka. He co-edited 3 books, including a preliminary report of the excavations at Nagardan. He worked as an academic consultant to the Buddhavanam project, Ministry of Culture and Tourism, Government of Telangana. At present, he is working as a principal investigator of the joint project that is titled Junnar Archaeological Research and Tourism Development Project. He has published 32 research papers in both national as well as international journals. His research areas include archaeology of religion, rock cut architecture, and religious paradigms of the Deccan. We'd like to welcome Dr. Shrikant Ganvir to deliver his lecture.
Thank you, sir.
Can you share your presentation, please?
Is it visible?
Yes. You can.
Yes, it is.
Am I audible enough?
Yes. It's fine.
Good evening. I would like to express my sincere thanks to the Tamil Heritage Trust for inviting me to deliver a lecture on the Paramaras of Malwa, who were the patrons of Bhumija styles, one of the important temple styles of ancient India. I would also like to congratulate to the organizers on planning and organizing such important Indology festival, especially on the medieval temples of India. As I told, I will be talking on the Paramaras of the Malwa region, which is one of the important dynasties of early medieval and medieval India, about whom we know very less information. But this dynasty contributed to the temple architecture, culture, literature of ancient India on a large scale. My talk will consist of introductory remarks, a brief introduction to the political setting of early medieval India, as well as a brief history of the Paramaras, Bhumija style, its antiquity, its salient features, architecture marvelous of Bhumija temples of the Paramaras, which were constructed in the land of Malwa, with some observations. The political, socio-economic, cultural history of early medieval India is always fascinating. When one looks into the past, the post-Gupta political setting after the 5th-6th century CE has made us to rethink the making of early medieval India. After the decline of the Guptas, followed by the Harshavardhan, numerous political powers emerged in Central India, Western India, and Northern India, as well as in South India. When we look after the post-Harshavardhan era, the Gurjar Pratiharas, Kalchuris started to establish their power in Central India, followed by the powers like Gahadwas, Chahmans, Solankis, Chandels, and Paramaras came into the political scenario of early medieval India. Paramaras were one of the important dynasties which not only ruled over the Malwa, but it had many branches, including especially the branch of Chandravati, Wagad, Jabalipur, Kirantakupa or Kiradu, named to few. It seems that on the basis of textual as well as epigraphic sources, the Paramaras had attained significant place in the contemporary political history during the early medieval India and continued till the beginning of 14th century CE as per the genealogical information. The present lecture is confined to the architecture contribution of the Paramaras of Malwa, who were ruling from their capital Dhara. Both archaeological as well as textual sources facilitate to understand the contribution of the Paramaras to cultural history as well as the political history. These sources mainly include art historical remains such as the temples, the sculptures, numerous inscriptions, their coinage, whereas a corpus of textual sources, which I mostly include, very important text, that is a Navasasanka Charita by Padmagupta Parimal, which provides very interesting information about the Paramaras as well as the most important Shilpa Shastras, one of the most important Shilpa Shastras, that is a Samarangana Sutradhar written by Bose, which throws light on the cultural history of early medieval India. This is an old map of early 19th centuries, and one can see the region marked by Malwa. So this is a basically, as we know that it is a quite difficult to demark the political boundaries of any dynasty at a given time. Having known this fact, this is just a part of a map which shows basically a boundary of a Malwa region to give a fair idea about the region where the Paramaras of Malwa ruled over. If you look at the political history of the Paramaras, they came into power from the late 8th century CE and ruled till the 14th century CE, early 14th century CE. So it means that they were almost ruled more than 3 to 4 centuries, more than 4 centuries over a large part of Central India. The genealogical information provides that there were 24 rulers who ruled over the Malwa. Upendra Raj was the first known king of the Paramaras, whereas Mahakal Dev was the last king. Same time, it is very important to understand the basically the political association. I'm not using the word rivalry because we find that besides the political rivalry, there was also the harmonious relationship between the two dynasties or among a group of different political powers. So when we talk about the political achievements in the means of the basically the victories and the warfares and the subsequently either defeats or victories, and then the expansion of the boundary, we can include the Pratiharas. They are basically the crisis between the Pratiharas, Rashtrakutas, Chahamanas, Kalchuris, Kalyani Chalukyas, and Solankis. So these are the a few dynasties with one can see the basically the political association or the nature of the association, which mostly turn into the kind of the rivalry or the series of warfares. I have basically I'm trying to basically provide a brief outline of the different kings who ruled over Paramaras and contributed to basically the expansion of the Paramaras and also the contribution to their culture, to the cultural history of the Paramaras. So I have basically I'm going to discuss the early Parmar kings and then few kings like Munjaraj, Sindhuraj, Bhoj, followed by the late or the post-Bhoja period kings. So as I told that the Upendra Raj was the first known king. We do not have much information about the early kings. As I told that Navasasanka Charita written by Padmagupta Parimal is one of the most important sources, and one has to also understand the nature of the historical biographies, which are basically the eulogistic in a nature, And as most of the the texts, belonging to the historical biography group or category, they mostly eulogistic or in nature. So probably having known a certain limitations to extract the historical facts, we have very less information about the early kings from Upendra Raj to Vakwati first. It seems that probably the early kings were associated with the Pratiharas, and basically we also find there some clashes with the conflicts with the Pratiharas, and these early kings were also trying to establish their independent political identity in the central India. What Navasa Sahasanka Charita says that Vakpati first was the king who got his power over the region of the Avanti. Vairasingha second was the king who got victory, capture the Dhara for a short period, which was a result to his attempt or series of attempts through which through the warfares with the Pratiharas, he was successful to capture Dhara, the capital, which later on became capital and important center of the political powers of the central India for a short time. Siyak first successfully got victory over the Pratiharas, as well as his victory over the Rashtrakutas is also very well known. It was Vakpati second Munjaraj who was known as a real founder of this branch of the Paramaras. He was also known for his immense contribution for administrative transformation as well as the cultural development of the Malwa region. The titles which the king had borne, such as the Amogha Varsha, Prithvi Vallabha, Shri Vallabha, suggest that the strong influence of the Rashtrakutas over these kings. As I mentioned earlier, Vakpati II and also his predecessor, they got victory over the Rashtrakutas. So the uses of the titles or the epithets which were generally applied to the Rashtrakuta kings, such as Amogha Varsha, Prithvi Vallabh, were used by this king, is very important political, having important political significance. When we look at the series of the warfares or the series of the conflicts between the Paramaras and the different political powers, especially during the reign of Vakpati II Munjaraj, it includes his victory over the Guhil state of Mewar, especially King Shakti Kumar, then Chahamanas of Nadol, then his victory over the Hunas, who were ruling in some pockets like the region of Malwa, Rajputana, Punjab, then also Kalchuri King Yuvaraj II. So, very important to see that the Hunas, which were entered in the land of ancient India during the time of the Guptas, were still occupied important place, although on a small scale in a different parts of western and northern India. Finally, this important, significant king who established the real power of the Paramaras in a central India, got defeated by Kalyani Chalukyan king Tailap II. So the defeat of Munjaraj by Kalyani Chalukyan king Tailap was a great setback to the political powers of the Paramaras. Sindhuraj, who came into power after Munjaraj in his early rule, made an attempt to stabilize the administration of the state. By the time Kalyani Chalukyan king Satyashraya got engaged in a war with the Cholas, so probably this was a very important political change or situation which further facilitated Sindhuraj not only stabilized the power of the Paramaras, but also got victory over the neighboring regions like Kosala and Lata. Although Munjaraj made an attempt to defeat the Hunas, the mention of warfare of Sindhuraj with the Hunas further confirmed that Hunas were still in power, at least in some pockets. So finally, according to the textual sources, credit goes to King Sindhuraj for the eradication or for the extermination of the Hunas from the land of central and western India. Wagad branch of Paramaras, who were the feudatories of the Paramaras of the Dhara, made an attempt to establish their independent power. It seems that Sindhuraj reinstated power over the Wagad branch of the Paramaras. It was the duration of great King Bhoja when the political power of the Paramaras was flourished. If we take a review of the political achievements of the Paramaras, one has to say that it was the reign of the King Bhoja, during which the political and cultural powers of the Paramaras reached at the stage of culmination. As we all know, he was a great patron of arts and letters. Equally, he was one of the powerful kings of the contemporary time period. Textual as well as archaeological sources furnish information that King Bhoja got victory over Lata, over the Kalchuri king Gangadeva, as well as Solanki king Bhima. Although we have the different variations regarding his political achievements, especially with the conflicts with the Kalyani Chalukyas and Chandelas, but the textual sources indicate that King Bhoj was established his victory over the Kalyani Chalukyas and Chandelas. Besides the political achievements of King Bhoja, King Bhoja is also known for his contribution to ancient Indian literature. He was among very few kings of ancient India who contributed on a different disciplines, different subjects of knowledge, from Shilpa Shastras to the Jyotisha. The text on a Shilpa Shastras written by King Bhoj include the celebrated text that is a Samarangana Sutradhara and Kalpataru. Another text on the Kosha Shastra, on the encyclopedia, include Nama Malika, Shabdanushashan, or the text like the Kurma Shataka, Champu Ramayana or a Bhoja Champu, Shrungara Manjari, are few important texts composed by King Bhoja. When we look into the post-Bhoja time period, to understand the political scenario of the Central India, it seems that the glory, the vital place which was attained by the Paramaras during the time of King Bhoja was discontinued after the King Bhoja. It does not mean that the successors of King Bhoja had not made any attempt to protect the empire of the Paramaras, to protect the state of the Paramaras. King Jai Singha, who was an immediate successor of King Bhoja, had engaged in warfare with Kalchuri King Lakshmikarna and Solanki King Bhima, and got victory. King Udayaditya, who was the patron of the famous celebrated temple Udeshwar, also known as the Nilakanteshwar Temple, was defeated by the Karna. The Lakshmadev was defeated Kalchuri King Yashakarna and had got victory over the region of the Palas, that is the Magadha and Vanga region. The last two important kings, Naravarma and Yashovarma, were got engaged in conflict with the Chahamanas and Solanki, respectively. Although Halakadeva was the last known ruler of the Paramaras, but it seemed that the Yashovarma, after the Yashovarma's time period, the degeneration of the Paramaras was commenced. When we talk about the Paramaras of Malwa and their immense contribution to Indian temple architecture, one has to think about the Bhumija style. For a long time period, Bhumija style was not independently known as a temple style. The three important temple styles, Nagara, Dravida, and Vesara, which is also known as a Karnataka Dravida by the scholars, were very well known. Earlier, scholars used to think Bhumija style as a regional variety of Nagara style. It was Stella Cambridge, the famous scholar, immensely contributed to temple architecture of ancient India. First time recognized his style as an independent style. The study of Shilpa Shastras, such as a Samarana Sutradhara, Aparajita Prucha, throw light on Bhumi's temple style, its architectural features, the different types. And now it has been well accepted that along with the three distinct temple styles, it was the Bhumi style which was flourished in a different parts of country along with Malwa as their original home. The two dated temples help us to trace the antiquity of this temple style. The oldest known temple of Bhumija style is located in Maharashtra. That is the Shiva temple at Ambarnath, which is dated to 1060 CE. Another oldest temple of this style is located at Udaipur in Madhya Pradesh. Okeshwar Temple is completed in 1080 CE on the basis of the epigraphic record. The Aparajita Pucha and Samarana Sutradhara, these two important Shilpa Shastras provide minute details of the Bhumi style, its different types, the art historical remains spread over Central India, Western India, and the Deccan region confirm that this style was flourished from between the 11th century to 15th century CE. From Stella Cambridge to Professor Adam Hardy. This is a very fascinating as well as long journey of understanding the researches carried out in the field of Bhumi style. Stella Cambridge firstly recognized this style as an independent temple style in her magnum opus on the Hindu temples. Krishnadev, a famous art historian, wrote a long essay on the Bhumi style in the 70s of the last century and carried out an extensive survey of the origin, antiquity, spread, regional variations, regional models of Bhumi style in his article. Professor M.S. Mate, in a short article published in 1975, discusses the aesthetic significance of Shikhar of Bhumija style and propounded a theory regarding the origin of the word Bhumija. K.V. Sundararajan and G.B. Deglurkar have discussed the Bhumish temples of Maharashtra and their regional features. Professor Rahman Ali in a study of a Paramara art, the temples of Madhya Pradesh, the Paramara art, first time made an attempt to discuss the temple architecture as well as the sculptural art of the Paramaras as a regional architecture and art. Dr. A.P. Jamkherkar analyzed the Bhumish temples of Maharashtra in his recent work published in the series of Gazetteers of Maharashtra, Art and Architecture. And very recently, Professor Adam Hardy carried out an analytical study of the Bhumija temples of Malwa region in general and an unfinished Shiva temple at Bhojpur in particular, based on the famous text Samarangana Sutradhar composed by Bhoja. The only epigraphic evidence of Bhumija style is found in a Kataveshwar temple, that is a 1213 of Kuppatur in Shimoga district. There are various opinions regarding the origin of this temple and its native place. Krishnadev thinks Malwa is the original place of Bhumi style. Professor Ahmed Haki thinks that Bhumija style was favored and perfected in the region of Malwa. M.S. Mate associated the aesthetic association of Bhumija style with particularly in the context of the Shikhara. When we look at the spread of this style, the temples are found in Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Rajasthan, Gujarat, Uttar Pradesh, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Chhattisgarh. So the region of Central India, Western India, South India, or the Deccan. And these are the few important representative temples found in the states of Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Rajasthan, and Gujarat to understand the spread of this style during the early medieval period. Samarangana Sutradhar talks about the Bhumija style, its different types, the minute detail from top to bottom, from Peter to Kalasha. And on the basis of the shape, squarish or circular, or having with 8 bhadras, we find 3 main types of this style, that is a Chaturasra, Vrittajati, and Ashtashara. As every temple style has its salient features on the basis of which not a particular style gets identified, but also gets differentiated on the principles of architecture and architectural models. Although the Bhumija temples have some resemblance with the temples of Nagara, especially the developed temples of the Nagara of early medieval period, but it was the Shikhar of Bhumija style which differentiates the temples of Bhumija from Nagara style. So the most important architectural part of this style is its Shikhara. And these temples are mostly identified on the basis of the Shikharas. But recent studies by Professor Adam Hardy have opened a new chapter in understanding the Bhumija temple architecture. And so, not only the Shikhar, but now we can say that the plan of the temples also help to understand the remains of a particular temple as belonging to the Bhumija style. The Shikhara has a long spine called as a lata with a Shura Senaka, a prominent sculptural medallion within a larger Chaitya window at the base of lata. And the Kutastambhas, the miniature Shikharas, are arranged with a diminishing height on the four quadrants. What is the most fascinating feature of the plan of the Bhumija temple is all Bhumija temples are invariably Nirandhara, that is a prasada, that is a without pradikshana path. And it is so because the arrangement or the construction of the Shikhara was closely associated with the Nirandhar arrangement of the temple, of the Garbhagriha. So, as I told that this is a center spine called as a Lata, and we have the at the end Shura Senaka, which is a large sculpture medallion, and mostly in the case of the, not always, but in most of the cases of the Bhumija temples of the Malwa, we have the different iconographic forms of Shiva. For example, Nataraja, Tripurantaka Shiva, Andakasura Shiva. Then the Kutastambhas, that is the miniature shrines. They rest on the pilaster and they are in a diminishing height. And we have the numbers from 3 to 9. The lowermost order is a Tribhuma. The highest order is a Navabhuma. So these pictures will help you to understand the different aspects of the Shikhar of the Bhumija. And as I told that, for a long time, it was only the Shikhar on the basis of which the scholars or the researchers used to identify any temple as of Bhumija style. If you go through the textual nomenclature, the scheme of the nomenclature or the terminology, so we have the Pitha, then we have the Vedibandha, then Jangha and Varandika. Dwara Shakha of the Bhumija's temple is one of the diagnostic features of the temple architecture. That from the Shilpa Shastras, we get the list of the number of the dwaras from Ekashaka to Navashaka. The Trishaka, that is a Subhaga, and Panchashaka, that is a Nandini. So these two types of Dwara Shakhas are prominently depicted in the Bhumija temples of Malwa region. On the basis of architecture features, the Bhumija temples of Malwa have been divided into 4 distinct phases. The first phase is based on the date which we get from the dated temple at Ambarnath, Shiva temple at Ambarnath, that is 1060 CE. So the first phase includes all temples which might have constructed before 1060 CE. And the main features of this phase include heavy Vedibandha moldings, the treatment of ornamental motifs, and early stage of Shikhar. And group of temples constructed at Onkara Mandhata is considered belonging to the first phase of Bhumija temples in the region of Malwa. The second phase was the most significant phase in the Bhumija temple architecture. The style reached at its culmination. And not only in the region of Malwa, but in the entire region where the Bhumija temples were constructed, we find the grand monuments, the magnificent monuments constructed during the second phase. And in this particular phase, the temples are profusely ornate. The Ganga is highly embellished with the sculptures. So from Pitha to the Kalasha, the entire temple belonging to the second phase look like the more ornate. And the Udeshwar temple at Udaipur is the best example of the Bhumija style belonging to this phase. In the third phase, we find degeneration in the glorious tradition of the architectural and sculptural ornamentation. Now, although the grand monuments were constructed during this time, but if we look at the Shura Senakas, we find they are comparatively simple. And the best example of this phase is a Mahadev temple at Jambi. And the last phase represents major transformation in the style, although the many of the architecture features of Bhumija's temple style have been transformed. The center spines are not prominent. The Shura Senakas have become now a decorative element. And Malwai temple at Alirajapur represent the fourth stage of Bhumija temple style. So the temple belonging to the first phase, that is a Mahanaleshwara temple at Onkara Mandhata. And we know that if you look at only the portion of the Pitha, Vedibandha and Jangha, and some part of the initial part of the Varandika, these architecture elements have been survived, and one can see this is a restoration which was done in the late medieval period. And very interesting to find that this temple was reconstructed in the 10th century and in the 11th century. So during the time of the Paramaras, the Mahanaleshwar Temple underwent renovation in the 11th century. And one can see the heavy moldings of the Pitha, Vedibandha, and also the arrangement of the wall is instead of the sculptural representation, one can see the Kutastambhas or the miniature shrines placed on pilasters. The moldings of the Pitha are ornate with the floral design, and only the Devakosta of the Bhadra part or the Bhadra Kosta displays the images. One can see the images of the Tripurantaka or Andhakasura, or this is an image found in the temple of a Nataraja. The most celebrated temple of this style is Okeshwar Temple, also known as a Nilakanteshwar Temple, which was completed in 1080 and was constructed during the time of Parmar king Udayaditya. The temple is known after this great king Udayaditya as Udeshwar. On the plan, the Bhumija Temples consist of Garbhagruha, Antarala, the Mandap, which is called as a Guda Mandap, and 3 Mukhamandapas. The east-facing temple consists of 3 Mukhamandapas as well as Sabha Mandapa. It is a stellate cum circular. It is a Saptarata on plan and Saptabhuma on elevation, and belonging to the Saptashunga type of Bhumija temple, the form of temple according to the textual tradition, which is the most favorite to Lord Shiva. The 7 horizontal and the 5 vertical bands of the Kutastambhas, and it has the 3 Shurasenakas on the 3 latas, along with the large Shurasenaka at the base of the front lata on the Shukanasa, above the Shukanasa or the below Shukanasa. One can see the harmonious arrangement of the Kutastambhas placed above each other in a diminishing order. The central spine, which is ornate with the small miniature arches, that is the Chandrashala, topped by the Amalaka Saraka and the Kalasha. The Dwarashakas of Mukhamandapas are of 3 shaka, that is the Subhaga type, whereas the Garbhagruha has a Nandini type of Dwarashaka, that is the Panchashaka. The Odumbara, Pedya, Lalata Bimba, Uttaranga, all different architectural elements of the Dwarashaka are lavishly ornate. So this picture gives a complete view of the temple, the Bhumija Prasada, where we have the Shikhar on the Garbhagruha, the Shukanas, and the Samvarna type of Shikhara on the 3 Mukhamandapas, as well as on the Gudamanda, and continued also some part of Mukhamandapas. The Mukhamandapas have a Kakshasana. The exterior of the Kakshasana is ornate with the narratives from the epics such as Ramayana, Mahabharata, as well as the narratives from the Bhagavad Puran showing the Krishna Leelas. Along with the epic narratives, one can also see the Sura Sundari as well as secular imagery on the exterior side of the Kakshasana. This is the Mukhya Dwar. One can see the elegantly carved the pillars and the Bharavakas, which are shown on the capitals of the pillars. The Pita and Vedibandha, especially the Jangha, as well as the Varandika portion of the temple, especially this particular temple, that is Okeshwar Temple, is lavishly ornate. And when we look at the details, we can find that the Kutastambhas, the space between the Kutastambhas, generally we know that basically the space between the different projections called as a Salilantara. But here one can see that how the entire temple as a whole, as a prasada, was a highly ornate with the religious imagery, with the motifs showing the flora, fauna, with the mythical animals, with the Velas, Bharavakas. The Shurasena of the Udeshwar temples are the examples of most elegantly depicted Shurasenakas in a Bhumija style. The Shurasenakas, as I told, in the region of Malwa, mostly display the images of Shiva in a different forms. The details of the Bhumija Shikhar provides an idea about its elegance. Ganga of Odisha temple is highly ornate with the religious imagery, including the Shaiva, Vaishnava, Shakta, as well as the images of Ganapati and Surya. Even the moldings of the Pita and Vedibandha are highly ornate. The Siddheshwar temple at Nimawar is another example of Bhumija temple of the Paramaras, which is also an example of elegant Bhumija Prasada. It is a Saptarata on a plan and Navabhuma in elevation. And the Shurasenakas display the images of Nataraja, Tripurantaka Shiva, and also the Chamunda. And this particular type, which has a Navabhuma Shikhara, is known as a Sarvanga Sundar. And as we know that The Navabhuma is the highest number. 9 stories or 9 Kutastambhas is the highest number of the Bhumij in the Bhumis in the Bhumis temple style. And that is why probably this is the rare example of Sarvanga Sundara in a Malwa. Likewise, Udeshwar Temple at Udaipur. This temple is also highly ornate with the religious as well as secular imagery. Especially the Janga of this temple is very well known for its depiction of the images of the gods and goddesses. Likewise, the Udeshwar Temple, Dwar Shaka of this temple is also ornate. Uttaranga shows the Saptamatrukas in independent Rathikas. The Pedya portion shows the Dwarapalas as well as the Nadi Devatas, that is a Ganga and Yamuna, and the Lalat Bimba displays an image of Ganesha. Although the Vrutta Samsthanak, that is a stellate cum circular temples, are mostly favored by the architects of the Malwa during the Parmar time period. But we have also an example of Chaturastra Temple, that is orthogonal temple at Jamli, that is Mahadev Temple. Although smaller in dimension as compared to Udeshwar Temple and Siddheshwar Temple at Nimawar, this temple is known for its elegance. The art historical remains of temple which have been preserved show the elegance. Now one can see major transformation in the moldings of Pitha, Vedibandha. They are now plain, having devoid of any kind of the ornamentation. Interestingly, the Janga ball is also plain, and only the Devakostas on the Bhadra portion display the images of Shiva. Still, one can find the sculptures of Shiva either as a Nataraja Shiva or Asanastha Shiva in the Shura Senakas. The image of lion is very interesting, which we do not find in other temples. The last temple of the glorious tradition of Bhumija Temple, which was originated and flourished during the time of the Parmaras, is a Malwai temple at Alirajpur. The skeleton plan, this temple is in bad state of preservation, and only the few architecture elements of this temple are survived. One can see the Janga portion does not display the religious imagery. The glorious history of the Parmaras and their contribution to the Indian temple architecture cannot be completed without discussing an unfulfilled dream of King Bhoja. That is the grand monument Shiva temple at Bhojapur. Although there are various theories propounded by the scholars regarding this temple, Dr. M.N. Deshpande, former Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, discusses the association of Shiva Temple at Bhojpur with the Samalangana Sutradhara. AP Sagar discusses the association of this temple with the Samalangana Sutradhara and the plan of construction of Grand Shiva Temple at Bhojpur itself. Kirit Mankundi expresses another view, and according to Dr. Mankodi, this temple, because of the placement of Samvarna type of roof over it, it could be the funerary monument. So the main objective to construct this temple was to construct funerary monument, not as a shrine. Recently, Professor Adam Hardy, on the basis of the drawings which were drawn on the different rocks in the vicinity of this grand monument, have made an important observation that it was proposed to build one of the greatest monuments or the greatest temples of that time by King Bhoja, which remain incomplete. So Professor Adam Hardy carried out an analytical study of this temple and made an observation that if this temple could have been completed by King Bhoj, it could have been the one of the most largest or the grandest temple or the religious shrine in India. So only the part of the Garbhagriha was constructed. So only the Pitha, the Jagati, the high platform, and the part of the temple which is constructed along with the grand Dwarashaka is enough to bear its testimony as being a grand monument. If it could have been completed, if it could have been constructed, it was not only remain as a grand monument, but also one of the most ornate temple of the Central India as well as India. The place of King Bhoja in the history of Indian temple architecture for not only for writing Samarangana Sutradhar, but also patronizing the Bhumija Temple style. Will always remembered. The construction of the Shiva temple at Bhojpur attests that when the temple was started, the construction of the temple was started, it was thought to construct a grand monument which could have been one of the wonders of that time. Although the genesis and early spread of Bhumija Temple was done in the land of Malwa, but in a short period, this style was flourished in Western India, such in the states such as Gujarat, Rajasthan, also in Uttar Pradesh, in the state like Chhattisgarh, and in the states of Deccan region such as Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka. And within a short span, the Bhumija Temple style of Indian temple architecture had occupied the prominent place in the contemporary religio-cultural tradition. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ganvir. There are obviously a whole bunch of questions. You had a very detailed presentation. Though in your slide you showed where all the Bhumija style had spread, you had also mentioned other places, including Chhattisgarh, Karnataka. In fact, Dr. Manoj Gundana, who had earlier made a presentation today morning, showed certain Vesara style temples, which was sort of a Dravidian type of architecture with the Bhumija style mixed together, which I'm sure you would be aware of, but I wanted to mention that. Now, in terms of the questions, there is one question from Mr. Ramaswamy, where he mentions Padmadeva's Nava Sahasankacharita mentions that post 973 CE, Siyaka adapted the life of an ascetic and clothed himself in, just one second, let me just read it, clothed himself in the grass robe of a royal sage and abdicated in favor of his son Vakpati. So he wants to know any suggestions on whether any further info is available about this incident, any suggestions for specific scholars.
So he rightly mentioned, that the composer who was at the court of Vakpati, and he wrote the Navasaha Sankacharita, and he was basically an ascetic, and also earlier court poet, and this was the only source, to know about the Paramaras. Although we have very less information about his life, Actually, sir, there is a corpus of the textual tradition about the Paramaras and basically their association. So their political history is very interesting, and I'm very much interested to know about the writers of these different historical biographies. So it may be the composers of a different biographies, started from Bana Bhatta to all these, how they have mentioned the victories, and probably there was a tradition which we very hardly talk about, the tradition of, you can say, the writing the historical text. I admit some part not complete, but fully, but some part is written in a eulogistic manner or prosaic like. But there are corpus of data while talking or while discussing the deeds of their kings. They talk about their contemporary culture, festivals, the socio-economic aspects, and probably we need to bring the data and to understand to reconstruct basically the cultural the past of that period. Yeah.
Okay. Sure. There is a question from Kishore Mahadevan. Did the Samarangana Sutradhara coin the term Bhumija, or was it coined by Stella Kramrish?
No. It was mentioned in the Samarangana Sutradhara itself. It was not coined by any scholar as such. Yeah.
Okay. Now, when you were talking about this Boja's temple, the unfinished or fallen, we don't know whether it was constructed and it fell down, or it was not even constructed above the base. Is it that Adam Hardy's theory is that it was meant to be a Bhumija temple in terms of its?
Yeah.
But we visited that place, and if you walk around, there is a place where there is a line drawing on the surface. But I don't remember actually the etching showing a Bhumija kind of a thing. It seemed to me, at least, I don't remember that carefully now. Sort of more like a Latina type of the drawing on top, the top portion. I don't remember seeing multiple Bhumis. Maybe the sketch was too thin. It was probably too late in the evening. I remember it was fairly late in the evening. But could it have been like a later day drawing by some prankster? I don't know. Can we really take it that it was something that the Sthapatis of that time had actually drawn it? Because you don't find such a picture anywhere for any of the temples.
I think, probably, as I told that, even Professor Adam Hardy also mentions in his book that if the temple could have been completed, it could have been one of the wonders, So
Right.
I think that probably, to fulfill the dream of the construction of the temple, probably many architects, that is the Sthapati and the Shilpis, might have been engaged in this work, So I think that it is a kind of the workbook, for the probably the novice, under the guidance of, you can say, an expert Sthapati. Probably some novice could have been also engaged, in making of this work, because I personally, when visited, there are basically the line drawings of the Pitha and then also the facade, it seems like probably, and the only portion, which was now preserved is a part of the Garbhagruha, Mula Prasad.
Correct.
And probably in entire region, started from the Onkar Mandhata, then Un. These are the early sites, which are dated to the time period of the Bhoja, the 11th century. We find that, early 11th century, we find that, the Bhumija temple style underwent the process of, you can say, the refinement, And probably this, that is why I don't personally think that it could be either the Shekhari or the Latina, because probably during the land of the Paramaras, we do not come across a kind of the remains of the Latina or the Shekhari of very well advanced or developed form. And Professor Adam Hardy, I'm not basically praising a lot him, but he carried out a very meticulous study and compare it with the textual tradition, because Samarangana Sutradhara talks about or gives a kind of the different picture, whereas the Aparajita picture, which is a kind of the more enlarged and the revised version of the some part of the Samarangana Sutradhara, which talk about the Bhumija, probably gives a more, you can say, the typologies, or the types. But Samarangana Sutradhara probably very interesting, as you mentioned about some of the temples of the Karnataka. We find, some of the temples, Tribhuma temple are not seen in the land of the Malwa, but they are seen in the land of the Karnataka. So it is very interesting how the textual traditions were, travel, migrated.
Okay. So I have another question, which is cutting across many of these lectures. Now, over the last 4 days, including today, we looked at some very large temples. So I will start with the Rajaraja's Bragadishwara temple, the single tallest temple in the standard Tamil Nadu Dravida version. Let's keep it there. Then we have Udayeshwara temple on the Bhumija style of the Nagari version. Then just earlier today, we saw the Kandariya Mahadeva in the Shekhari version. And in the Kalingan version, the Konark temple, of course, there is Puri that is extant. But if the Konark one had withstood time, would have been larger than that of Puri. Right? But in a sense, and then add the Bojas, unfinished temple, right? So there is sort of we are reaching the the impossibility, in the sense that you make it any larger and it won't hold, irrespective of a hardcore granite one or a softer stone. no one tried anything bigger than Brihadishwara in Tamil Nadu.
Yes.
Because it just perhaps may not hold, right? The complexity of the Vimana, the superstructure, subsequent ones by his own son, Rajaraja's son, could have built a bigger one because the money was not a problem. But somewhere the architect, the Sthapati, told him, hey, don't push it any further. And we have the example of, even though you were sort of buttressing it with the iron beams, Konark is simply not holding, right? And in that light, look at Bhoja's attempt. Perhaps somewhere they felt that, maybe, we overreached. If we had really built it, would it stand? Might have been a question. I don't know. I'm just wondering. If you really look at even the Puri one, when we visited there, there is a lot of support they have on the side. There is always this fear. Will it hold? Does it hold? I mean, I today asked Dr. Fanikant Mishra about the Kandariya Mahadeva. Will it hold? I mean, it is holding. There's a lot of renovation work that has happened, and he says there are cracks. Combine all of this into one, and there is Lingaraja, of course, as my colleague Shivshankar Babu is pointing out. These are temples which are becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. Are we pushing the limit? I mean, were they pushing the limit in the past? And all of them happened around this time period. Which is one of the reasons, when we are talking about this 10th to the 13th century, people in different parts of India trying to outdo one another, trying to use their local models, but trying to build the biggest, the best, the grandest ones. Some succeeded, some didn't. Now, I would like to get your opinion of this.
Yes, it seems that you have rightly pointed out that Rajendra first, if he wished, he could have been constructed the grand monument than the Bhudeshwar,
right?
Because he was the king, under during the time of Rajendra first, the India, the basically the political achievements, or you can say the expansion, was beyond the political boundaries of the present days, and we know that not only the Sri Lanka, but also he was a successful to establish his power in basically the Southeast Asia, but probably after visiting Brihadishwar temple or Vimana, Brihadishwar Vimana, what I personally felt, probably this monument represents the perfection in the terms of the magnitude, in the terms of basically the harmonious association between the art, architecture, aesthetics, and the paintings. One cannot forget the paintings when we talk about the Brihadishwar, although it is not possible to visit everyone. So probably such a kind of, you can say, the harmonious, fusion of a different aspects of the culture, is a scene, in the Brihadishwar. Probably it was also a kind of wonder, how such a stupi, of which is weighing weight, which the weights of the stupi is around 80 ton, if I'm not wrong, how to place such a grand piece of the stone on the top of the basically the such a height, if you take the measurement from the bottom to the top, it is around 216 feet, if I'm not wrong, of a Brihadishwar. And so probably that perfection was also in the perfection of the construction techniques. And also we find that, how the early Chola kings were carried out the experiments. And suddenly, for me, the temples are not only the religious monuments, but they are the statements, political statements. They are basically the representation of the political power, the power in the given space and time, So one has to also understand the temple not as a religio-cultural institute, but also behind that as a kind of the political statement in the given time and space. So the Cholas during that time, no doubt, had attained the most significant power in the country. So probably also one has to also see that, because we find that, the Pallavas who were trying, who were basically doing the experiments with the different kind of the stones when they started the construction of the temples at Mahabalipuram, followed by Kanchipuram. So the early temples like Shore Temple at Mahabalipuram, or the Olakkaneshwar Temple, so the Mukindana Temple. So the various experiments of using the granite or the quartz or the basically the stone which are in the same family of the such a hard rocks was doing, and then they for construction of their magnum opus such as the Kailashnath Temple at Kanchipuram, or even the Vaikuntha Perumal Temple at Kanchipuram, they use sandstone. So
Right.
from Gad, and the last temple that is Virattaneshwar Temple at Tirupani was again a different experiment of using construction of the entire monument in a granite. So from granite to sandstone to granite. So probably the Chola architects and the artisans, that is the Shilpis and Stapadis, had learned many things from these experiments. And that is why probably, because this is for me, this is not a basically, for us, we take examples as a basically as a representative examples in understanding the development, but they were also the important examples for the process of the experimentation. And finally, with the experiments of their successor, that is Pallavas, probably the Chola architects, artisans, that is the Shilpis and Stapadis, had learned, and then the dream of the basically the best Vimana of the Dravida style was fulfilled. In the other time period, the temples you basically talk about, we do not know whether the political setting was responsible in the case of the unfinished temple at Bhojpur, or also the temple especially which is not in a good state of preservation, like the Konark Sun Temple. So probably as I told that the temples they not only remain as a religio-cultural institute, but also became a kind of the political statement. And then probably there was a kind of the competition between the two dynasties or among the different political powers to construct the highest one. So probably this tendency further facilitated them to construct the more higher, and then the Brudeshwara more, the taller than any of the monument. And further, probably in doing so, probably mistakenly or unmistakenly, they probably forgot about the technical aspects, and further such a technical aspects or the technical details further evolve as a kind of the obstacles in the process of the fulfillment of their dreams. I think so. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, it's a fascinating theory to look into. Today with our understanding of civil engineering and structural design and failure analysis and all the architectural come civil engineering aspects, you can go and study these massive structures.
Yes.
Without a binder, without holding things in its place, with the heavy material. You can now study what is the limit of this design. I mean, how big can you actually take it to the next level, and the level after, and the level after, etc. Right? Now, for us, I could fondly look at some of the images of Udayeshwara. When we were looking at, we had a site seminar a couple of years back to, just a year before COVID, the 2019 January, from Tamil Heritage Trust, a lot of us visited Madhya Pradesh. Udayeshwara was added to our list. Initially, we did not have Udayeshwara. We had so many places to see, from Sanchi and then, of course, to Bhojpur and many other places. But eventually, we added Udayeshwara because, this was one major intact Bhumija style. It was sort of middle of nowhere effectively compared to the kind of places that we were supposed to visit, but it was absolutely worth it.
Yes.
And when we reached there, middle of the day, we were not really expecting, the size is never visible from photographs. You have to be present. You have to really walk in and then, just look upwards and then see what you are, what you had meant to see all along. That, it is something outstanding. Now, I wanted to ask you something else. What is the smallest Bhumija temple? The smallest in its conception and size. You did show something in Wumli, if I'm not mistaken. Is that the place that am I mentioning the name correctly? Is that the place which is smallest, or is there something that
the temples at Onkar Mandata as well as the temples at Un, they are basically the Panjabhum. So actually according to the Samarangana Sutradhar, the lowest is basically the Tribhuma. But in the land of Malwa, we don't find the Tribhuma temple.
I see.
That's very surprising. So
Okay.
the generally we get from the Panjabhuma, then Saptabhuma and Navabhuma.
It's obvious that it has to be more than one. Therefore, it has to be three. And so that's why I wanted to know if it is there somewhere that we can actually see. No, it is not. It's not been found.
It is not in the Malwa. It is in Karnataka.
Then it is in Karnataka. Then again, it would have been modified with the Vesara format.
Yes.
Right. So it is not just a pure Nagari form of the Bhumija. So there are changes there.
Yeah, there are.
In its base plan, it will be probably different.
Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. That was very good explanation. Dr. Kumud Kanitkar is mentioning that Nandi Khandi in Andhra Pradesh is a Tribhumi temple.
Yes.
So that is quite surprising that outside of Malwa you actually find some of these examples. So it is likely that they were probably built in the Malwa region, and but perhaps they are all gone. Because you don't even find other than Udeshwara and one other example that you showed, many of them are in sort of dilapidated condition and not in the best maintained versions. Thank you, Dr. Ganvi. That was really a fascinating lecture. Very, very slow paced. Slowly you expanded from the history, the socioeconomic situation, and slowly brought all the other dynasties around, the key kings, and then slowly moved on to the texts, and then from there to the actual structures. That was really excellent. Let me invite Kishore to thank you, and then also get closer to the proceedings.
Thank you. Thank you, Badri. If I might add to your comments, I think it was a master class in Bhumija Temples. Dr. Shrikant's lecture definitely brought back memories of the trip to Madhya Pradesh and relived the awe that we had when we visited the Udeshwara Temple particularly. So thank you very much, Dr. Shrikant Ganvir. With that, we come to an end of the fourth day of this Indology festival. Tomorrow, our final day, we have two lectures. Tomorrow, we go back to the evening schedule. We don't have lectures in the morning. So tomorrow we have two lectures. At 6 p.m. we have Dr. Shivanag Reddy, who earlier spoke at Tamil Heritage on the Buddhist heritage of Andhra Pradesh. He will be talking about the Kakatiyas and their heritage monuments. Followed that at 7:30 p.m. we have Dr. Paromita Das. Her lecture is on a dynasty that is perhaps lesser known to some of us here at here in Tamil Heritage, just the Ahom dynasty and their architectural style. Please do join us at 6 p.m. tomorrow. Thank you very much. Good night.